boards in Indian firms, and what happens in practice and what is on paper. This is the short title. So, okay. So as you already know, SDG 5 is on gender equality on all spheres. So UN places a lot of importance not just on the equal participation of women and men in any kind of jobs, but also it puts special focus on jobs that involve this decision-making power, so decisive roles. So to give women greater voice in all the different spheres are important. So we spent a lot of time last year to come up with this draft where we are trying to do a big gender atlas at the UN, trying to map all the different research that is done on different parts of the world by UN organizations, and to see how SDG 5 interacts with other sustainable development goals. So which also made us think how important the SDG 5 is. So it's each of the sustainable development goals, you cannot think of it by its own because it also interacts a lot with others. So for example, the other sustainable development goal on decent work will not be achieved if there is no decent work for women. The same is true for no hunger. The same is true for many other sustainable development goals. So it's very important that this is one of the pillar or one of the building blocks for other sustainable development goals as well. As Helen Clark at the UNDP pointed out, the international law recognizes that everyone has a right to participate in public life, but it remains an ongoing challenge to achieve women's equal participation, especially in decision making. So in many of the meetings or many of the, let's say, big events when there are policymakers involved, we really see that the number of women are very few. I have seen that sometimes I'm the only one when the group is small enough. So these are the things that have to be changed, and we are talking about women in, especially in this paper, we are talking about women in decisive roles. So as also Shija ma'am just pointed out, gender equality is not only about protection of human rights per se, but it's also about economic efficiency and economic development. The World Bank report in 2011, they already pointed this out, that the greater gender equality is also smart economics because it enhances productivity and improve other development outcomes. So it's important for, as I pointed out, for other sustainable development goals and overall economic growth. But this is not simply true only for the macro level, but also at a micro level, there are economic gains from increased gender diversity. When I talk about micro level, it can be firms, organizations, it can be government institutions. In any kind of an organizational setup, it's important to have diverse people in the decision-making process, because there are studies that have said that different genders have different viewpoint towards many aspects that involves decisions. So here, when I say micro level, I talk about firms. Firms in India. It covers both manufacturing and service sector. And I'm talking about decision-making jobs. So not at an employee level, not different levels of skilled or blue-collar jobs within organizations, but managerial positions or the board positions. In the board of directors, how many women are there? This is the question that we are asking here. And there are advantages of having women on board. There are studies that have shown that there are advantages of having women on board. There are studies that show that women have a different kind of knowledge about customer market. So they have more intimate knowledge, they are more innovative, they are more socially and community minded. So for instance, a recent work that came out last year at the European Commission, they showed that in Europe, for the firms with higher share of women on board, they adopted much more green practices than the others. So just to give you an example. So overall, um, uh, gender diversity could bring in a different perspective to decision making. There are many studies that have looked at the share of women on board and firm performance, like the one that I just mentioned. However, it's not so easy to understand the causal relationship, especially, let's say in economic terms, especially when we are at an equilibrium state, when there is nothing changing in the sense. It's difficult to understand if high performing firms hire women, or it's the gender diversity in the board that leads to high performance. Here, when I talk about high performance, it can be considered in a broad term, because there are studies that have talked about different aspects of performance. Like it can be growth, it can be hiring of employees, sales growth, it can be profits, it can be also environmental performance or innovative performance. There are works on all of these. However, as I said, it's very difficult to understand the causal link, especially when you don't have an exogenous shock. So here I tried to take one of those kind of exogenous shock that happened in India to see how it affected the women participation. This is the exogenous shock that I'm talking about. So in India, there has been a new law in 2013, the Indian Companies Act, the revised one in 2013. It required at least one woman on corporate board. So for specific certain, let's say, classes of companies, which I will explain in a bit, which are the companies that had to have a woman on board. So the question that we ask here is, has this law been successful in increasing the effective participation of women? So it's important to realize what is effective participation of women. I'm not saying, we are not interested in looking at if this law has been effective in making firms appoint a female director. If there's a law, they have to comply. So what we want to understand is if these new females that they have hired, how much do they participate in decision making? This is the interesting question that we have. Not if firms just comply to the law. On the first side, I look at if firms with a woman on board are different from other firms, to see if there is any kind of rationale behind not having a woman on board. This is the first part of the paper. And the second part, I check what happens after 2013. So I look at this separately for firms who already had a woman on board before 2013, and for the ones that hired their first female after 2013, because the second set of firms, likely they did that because of the law. So the government came up with the law, so they decided to have a woman on board. So we want to check the effective participation of women for the firms that already had a female before 2013 and for the ones after 2013. The first question on, okay, yes. Yeah. So before getting to the research question, let me explain to you how's the data. The data that I use is known to be, let's say, one of the biggest databases for Indian economy, where we can track firms in time. It's called as a Provis database compiled by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. And this data it has firms listed both on the National Stock Exchange and Bombay Stock Exchange. So it has the usual balance sheet data like sales, profits, investments, if the firm is innovating, how much they spend on R&D, exporting, so this kind of information. And then it also has information on the board members. So which is information on the board members. It has the name of the board member. There's the number of board meetings attended of each board member, the remuneration, and also it has a director sitting fee. So how much you get per sitting. The data does not have explicit reporting of gender, so it doesn't tell you, okay, this person is a male or a female. However, it has initials. So before the name, there is Mr., Mrs., sometimes SMT, so Srimati, just to indicate which is the gender. So this helps us in understanding which is the gender. But this is not the case for all the data. Sometimes it's doctor. So then at that point, we have to do this manually. We have to check manually, which is the gender. And so after putting in the gender of all the directors, the total firms are around 3,000. And the time period is between 1990 and 2018. So the first question that, as I said, was interesting was to look at if firms with women on board are different from others. So we look at some firm characteristics. It's also based on previous literature. So we look at the size of the firm. I mean, are firms bigger than the other, are the firms with women on board bigger than their counterparts with only male on board? There is some literature on this. The idea that they point out that it's possible that they are bigger because when the firm gets bigger, they are more visible in public and they need to, let's say, show that they have a woman on board. And so it's more likely that the firms that are bigger have at least one woman on board. Another aspect is age, and the same with growth and profits. Basically, I look at growth and profits just to understand if there is any kind of difference in performance for firms with women on board. And then I also look at some aspects which kind of capture the risk-taking behavior. So you see that these are distributions of the variables that I just said now. The one below, I don't know if you see this, this is the one of size. We see that the black distributions are on the ones with female on board. It's slightly to the right, which means they are bigger firms. But other than size, we don't see any difference between the distributions. So the black distributions are the firms with female on board. The red ones are only male board. So the first two are for performance, like growth and profits. We don't see any difference. There are two distributions. You don't see it because it's really on top of each other, which means that there is basically no difference on performance if you have a female on board or not. So it kind of suggests that there is no reason not to have a female on board from the firm level perspective. Also, so as I said before, I also look at some other variables. Why? Because some literature points out that women on the board means the firm takes less risky investment. So they don't invest much, they don't borrow much, they're usually risk averse. This is one of the points that have been mentioned in some of the previous literature. So here, considering this, I look at like investments, borrowings, which are kind of proxies to understand how the firm behaves. And there is no big difference, but if at all there is a difference, we see that the female on board, the black distributions are slightly to the right, which means that they take more, they invest more. The firms with women on board also do more borrowings, which means these are to be invested. So overall, I would say from this that we don't see any big difference other than size, which means there is no reason not to have a woman on board. The plots that I showed you now was for before 2013. Now this is the shock that I was telling before. In 2013, there has been a change in the corporate law. So India introduced this mandatory quota for certain companies to have at least one woman on the board of directors. So which are these certain companies? One, every listed company shall appoint at least one woman within 1 year from the commencement. All public companies, so not only the first, but also the public companies, other than the listed ones that have a paid up share capital of 100 crore or more, or 300 crore or more, should appoint at least one woman director within the first 1 year from the commencement. And also to comply to these, maybe I can, okay, okay. So to comply with this, they also had different timing. So for the firms that were already existing, they had to comply this within 1 year. However, for the newly incorporated firms, they had to do it within the 6 months. So in the analysis below, when I check the statistics, I look at it for each year separately. So maybe you will see that these effects are take 1 year or two to come in practice. So the first thing that comes to one's mind is, has this law been effective in having more share of women on board? In developed countries, there is evidence, especially when one look at the last 20 years or so, that the share of women on corporate board have been increasing. I mean, this is a work for US, but the same has been seen also for several European countries. So what we want to see is that, has there been such a scenario in the Indian case? So this is a plot that shows the share of male and female directors. The yellow line here is the share of female directors, and the red one on top are the share of male directors. Now you see that after 2010, around 2013, there has been a slight increase, very slight increase, which is basically the law, the effect of the law, in the sense this plot just shows us that the firms have been complying, in the sense to the law, nothing more. In the sense, it's not that the share has dramatically increased, or and obviously it's a share, so when the female director increased, the red one is also slightly declining up to 2013. Before being deceived by this plot, but again, it's a very slight increase, we have to understand that this is just showing that the firms have decided to have a woman on board. I mean, they are just complying with the law. What we want to see is the effective participation, as I said before. What are these women doing? For this, I thought it's important to check for firms who already had a woman on board before 2013, and for firms whose first appointment was after 2013. So this is the first category of firms where I look at the number of board meetings attended per director. So before 2013, the firms that had a female on board, the median values are very similar to the one of male. So the most frequent case, the most probable is that, because it's a median value, is not the average, because the extreme values could alter the average. We see that more or less both males and females, the most likely scenario is that they attend around 5 meetings per year. The maximum for males are very different. You see it's on the 20-30s range, while for females it's on the 7 to 9 range. This is before 2013, and let's see what happens after 2013. So these are firms that have appointed their first female director after 2013. So just to comply with the law. You see that the median is very different. The median values of females is just 1 compared to 5 for males. And it's even dramatic that even the maximum is 1 for the first year. So these females are appointed, they are part of the board, but apparently they don't attend any board meetings, or let's say they are not actively involved in the decision-making process. And the median also in 2018, which is the last year of the database that we have, the median is still half of the value for males. And of course, the maximum is different. Now, we also check the remuneration. So there is a lot of literature that talks about the gender gap. And it's an issue that have been discussed by academicians, policymakers, social commentators, journalists, and it's an issue that is widespread across different countries. The gender gap is wider in developing countries and more close in developed countries. And there also has been a change, especially in developed countries, that the gap has been lessening, especially in US. So the causes of the gender gap, there are two main reasons that are cited. One is the human capital theory. The human capital theory basically say that women usually have responsibility, family responsibilities, or let's say childcare responsibilities. So they don't get the time to train or develop their skills, and so they have less skills. However, within the theory also, studies point out that there is also the prejudice that women doesn't have time, and so they don't invest in their skills, and so they are less skilled. So there is also the prejudice within this human capital theory. The other cause that is cited is the occupational segregation. The idea is that, or what they argue is that there are some jobs that are by nature low paid, and women tends to concentrate on this kind of jobs. So this is the other causes that have been cited. There are also other reasons that are country specific, region specific, location specific, that might contribute other than these two to this gender gap, the pay gap. However, as I said before, there is evidence, recent evidence, that this wage gap has considerably declined, especially in countries like the US. So we see what here I check what happens in the case of India, especially in the context of top positions, and also in the context of the law, of the change in the corporate law. So these are salaries of board members for 2010. Here, let me explain again the distributions. The black one is of the female and the red one is of male board members. So we see that the female distribution just stop at around 17. These are log values on the x-axis. So the red keeps going on. So here are all positive values, while these are the lesser values. These are all higher values, let's say. You see that there is a lot more frequent that the males get much more, let's say, higher salaries than women. This part doesn't even exist for the females. However, the lower part is very similar in the sense that the lower part of the salaries, there are both males and females that get the same level of salary. This was for 2010, and let's see what happens in 2015. As you see, these two distributions are quite different. So the red one and the black one is really shifted, one to the left and the other to the right, which means that the red distribution kind of stochastically, like statistically, dominate the black one, which means the higher salaries of males are higher than the higher salaries of females, and the same with the lower case. So this means that the gap has further increased after 2013. But this, you have to think, or my guess is that the new appointed females after the 2013 law, likely firms decided to have a female on board just like a token, just to comply with the law, but they don't attend board meetings, and they are also paid very few. So these are the salaries that made these distributions likely to shift from one to the other, widening such a gap. So when in the beginning, I started to talk about effective participation. Why effective participation is important? Because obviously when there is a law, there will be an increase in number from 0 to 1. This is just firms complying with the law. So we don't want to, we are not interested in looking at this obvious increase in number, but what are these females, how much decisive role do these females have in the board? How much of effective participation is there? This is the question that we try to answer here. And actually, we see that there is big difference in the participation of in terms of board meetings attended, especially after 2013. And also there has been a widening gap in the pay. Now, this doesn't mean that this law per se is not good. The idea, the point I want to put forward is that, are these laws enough to solve the problem of gender disparity in corporate boards? Especially in countries like India, where we have a complex social structure, the social norms are play an important role. We need a lot of, let's say, different building blocks that will help these laws to be effective in practice. And so it's not important to have 1 or 2 laws here and there, but we need a systematic change. And one needs to think of what are the policies that can help in this direction, and how these policies will help in, let's say, improving the gender diversity or having more gender balance that go beyond such tokenism. That's what I would call, and also other literature have called, in corporate boards. I mean, this is not the case only of corporate boards, but this can be the case also of other institutions where there are this kind of policies without the supporting building blocks around it. And that's it. Thank you. I will stop sharing the screen, and